first problem we have here, and all I'm trying to do here today is establish that quadratics, perfect square quadratics, how they look in the three different forms you see them. So I have x squared plus 8x plus 16. This is a perfect square, which is what we're trying to get our hands around. Two numbers that multiply to give me 16, that add to give me 8 are 4 and 4. So this is x plus 4 times x plus 4, which is also x plus 4 squared. These are the three forms of a perfect square, a quadratic square, a perfect quadratic square. It's called a perfect square because it can be written as something squared. Okay. This is going to be key to solving our problems. Here's the next one. Get this down and then we will fill in the blanks. Okay. So once again, these are three forms, and this is a very close preview to what we will be doing. So the idea is, what number do we put in here to make it a perfect square? Well, it's actually not that hard. We have it from these two here. We have a hint from this. What is 5 times 5? But also, where do we get to 5? Where do we get to 10? Take half of this. Half to 10 is 5, and you square it to get 25. Okay. Half of what this is gives us our square. Take half of that and square it. Now, x plus 5 times x plus 5, x plus 5 squared. Same idea. Okay, so for this one, the idea is I want to fill out what my b term. Remember, we have ax squared plus bx plus c. So the idea is, what number do I square to get 49? 7 times 7. This is not 7 here. What was the relationship between 5 and the number here? It's twice that. What was the relationship between 4 and the b term? It's twice that. So if I square 7 to get 49, this number here should be 14. And here at the end, I have x plus 7 squared. And last one. This one's a little more difficult, but this one is exactly what we're going to be doing today to solve our quadratic problems. Okay, this is what we're going to use to solve our problems, is this last step here. This is almost exactly like what we're going to be doing. So the idea is, I want to figure out what number goes here to make this a perfect square. Now, I looked at all these other ones. What's the relationship between them? So I look at this number in front here, the 12 in front of the x. I take half of that, which is 6. That's what number I get here, and I square that to get 36. It's half of this number here is the key to what we're going to be doing today. Square that to get 36. It's this here, which means that I have x plus 6 squared. Questions so far? This first page is strictly to show you the relationship between this and this, between this one and this one, between this one and this one, and this one and that one. They are the same thing. And we're going to be going from this in creating this one here to writing it as a square. That's going to be a step in what we're going to be doing today. A step in what we're going to be doing today. And here's what we're doing today. Completing the square. Completing the square is a way of solving quadratics by completing a perfect square, problems that won't factor. If you can factor a quadratic, you want to use factoring. If you can factor the quadratic, completing the square is what you do if you can't factor, and it really sucks. I will freely admit I do not like completing the square that much. There are a few things you use it for, but very few things you use it for. Okay. You will have a test question on this. You will want to make sure to get your notes very good today. One, to be able to do the homework, and one, to have this ready to go when you take your test.
When's the test?
The test is the Thursday when we come back. Not this week. Not next week, because there's no school next week. The week after that. That's the plan. So we're going to have a couple of days of review, and then the test. That's the plan at this time. I know. Okay, so remembering perfect squares, this is just kind of what we did. X plus 4 squared. If I want to take x plus 4 squared and multiply it out, use the shortcut, square the first term to get x squared. Multiply these two, gives you 4x, and then double that to get 8x, and then square the number at the end to get 16. Okay, that's how you square it out. Take the first number, square it, multiply the 2 and double to get the middle, and then square the last one to get the end. If I have one that's already squared, I can unsquare it, rewrite it as a perfect square by doing the same idea kind of in reverse. I want to write x squared plus 6x plus 9 as a perfect square. My first term is easy because if I have x squared here, my first term is x, always. It's finding the next part that's a little more difficult. It's not that hard. Here's what you do. You take a look at half of this. What's half of 6? 3. If I square 3, do I get 9? So that means I'm going to have plus 3. Okay? All right. Time to flex and get ready, because this is where the hard part comes in.
Why are you flexing?
Because I'm getting ready, because this is the hard part. Now, here's a really cool thing. You have step-by-step how to solve the problem. This is it. If you learn this step-by-step, if you follow this step-by-step procedure, completing the square is not terribly difficult. But you have to follow this step-by-step. You can't shortcut it. That's why paying attention today is really important. Understanding this step-by-step procedure. Having it down for your notes. Having it down for doing your test. And having these notes ready to use on your test. Hint, 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 hint. No. God, you did. Okay. First step. Move the constant to the other side and leave a space. So what I want to do is I want to get rid of this negative 9. So to move it over, I would add 9 to both sides. Okay. Now, When you rewrite that, x squared plus 4x space equals 9 space. I'm going to explain. If you wait and have a little patience and listen to me rather than interrupt, it would be fine. Okay. We are now going to complete the square. This is actually the step where the term completing the square comes from. We are going to do what we were doing on the previous page. What number do I put here to make this a perfect square? And it tells you, divide b by 2. B is the number in front of x, and square it. So I take b, in this case, b is 4, divide that by 2. 4 divided by 2 is 2, right? And then I square that. 2 squared equals 4. That is what goes in the blank on both sides. Whatever I put on one side, I have to put on the other. So I add 4, and I add 4. Okay. Add this number to both sides. I just did that. So I did step 2 and step 3. Take the one term, the b term, divide it by 2, square it. Add that number to both sides. Now, step number 4. Factor it in a perfect square. In other words, take this, rewrite it as x something squared. What did I square to get the 4? 2. I squared 2. This is the number I squared. This is the number that goes here. Now, on the other side, what's 9 plus 4? 13. Square root both sides and solve for x. So I've got basically two more steps going here. I don't want x plus 2 squared. I want to get rid of that square. So I square root both sides. Square root the perfect square. Square root the 13. Okay. If I take the square root of x plus 2 squared, the square root and the square root undo each other, I end up with x plus 2. That's what this becomes, x plus 2. Equals plus or minus the square root of 13, because it's not factorable. If it was factorable, it would be a perfect square and I wouldn't be doing this. Leave it as the square root of 13. Do not, if it's not a perfect square, just leave it like it is. Don't give me a decimal. Don't do anything else to it. Leave it as the square root of 13. Don't forget the plus or minus. Now, I'm not done yet. Told you. Long one. I need to get x by itself. I have x plus 2. To get rid of the 2, I subtract 2 from both sides. Now, so I end up with x equals. I cannot combine the negative 2 or the minus 2 with the square root. For one reason, that's plus or minus. So my answer is negative 2 plus or minus the square root of 13. That's my answer. And I have 2 answers. I technically have 2 answers. Just like when we factored, you got 2 answers. I have 2 answers. I have negative 2 plus the square root of 13, and I have negative 2 minus the square root of 13. Plus and minus. I got 2 answers there. If you follow the steps, it's not hard. Step by step, get through the problem. Okay, but the steps are also laid out for you. So, this example here is actually, what is that square? What number do I add? So if I were adding, I want to basically the idea on this one is what's the blank, fill in the blank, what goes here. So I look at this example here, x squared minus 16x Fill in the blank just like we did on the other side. What's half of negative 16? 8. What is 8 squared?
64.
So I add 64. I take negative 16, divide it by 2 to get negative 8. Then I take negative 8 and square it to get 64. All this is practicing filling in the blanks. That's what we're doing here. We're filling in the blank spot. When we added to both sides, and you left the blank, you had to fill in the blank. We're filling in the blank. That's what we're trying to do here. So in this one, I take half of 20. What's half of 20? 10. What is 10 squared? 100. So that means I put 100. Take 20, divide it by 2 to get 10, and then 10 squared equals 100. We're not solving. We will these. This one here, I'm just practicing filling in the blank. I'm practicing completing the square. That's literally all we're doing is writing it out, completing the square. What number gives me a perfect square? So what goes in the blank on this one?
2. I mean 8. I don't know.
What's half of this?
2.
2. What's 2 squared?
4.
4. Take half of this number, so I take 4 divided by 2, get 2, and square it to get that. What goes here? What's the blank that goes here?
36.
I take half of this, take negative 12 divided by 2 to get negative 6. I take negative 6 and square it to get 36. This is the part, when we were here, this is the filling in the blank part. That's all it is. What number goes in that blank? That's all that was. Okay. So, let's solve these. Okay, so the first one. First step, get rid of the constant. So I take the 16, move it over to the other side. So I subtract 16 from both sides.
32.
X squared minus 14x, leave a blank, equals negative 16, leave a blank. That's your first step. Move it over, leave a blank. Second step, fill in the blank. To fill in the blank, I take half of this. Take negative 14 divided by 2. Negative 14 divided by 2 is negative 7. There's an important reason to watch the negatives and positives. You'll see why in a minute. So the number that goes in here is negative 7 squared, or what? Add 49 to both sides. That's completing the square. Now we still have more steps to solve it. First 2 steps done. Next step. Rewrite this as a perfect square. My first term is easy. It's x. How did I get to 49? What did I square to get 49? I squared negative 7. This is important on this one. Negative 7. If your b term is negative, this needs to be minus here. Okay. Previous one I did, it was positive, so it's positive. This one's negative, so it's negative. Okay. What goes on the other side? What do I do to find the other side? I add those two together. Negative 16 plus 49.
Oh, I didn't do it.
Yeah, you didn't do it right. 33. Square root both sides. Square root. Square root. The square root of x minus 7 squared is x minus 7. The square and the square root undo each other. That's why we did the square rooting. Equals. I can't take the square root of negative 33, so that's just plus or minus square root of 33. My next step, I have to get x by itself, so I change colors here. I add 7 to both sides. Bless you.
Bless you.
So I get x, because I added 7, so I get x equals. I cannot combine the square root of 33 and 7 together, so I get 7 plus or minus the square root of 33. That is my answer. It's a step-by-step process. If you follow the steps, it's not the easiest thing in the world, but it's not the most difficult either if you follow it step by step. Okay? One more problem, but there's a problem with the next problem, other than the fact that it's a problem. What is the first term? 2x squared. I'm not allowed to have anything other than x squared when I do this. It's very easy to fix. Divide everything by 2. Divide by 2, divide by 2, divide by 2, divide by 2. So I get x squared minus 4x minus 5 equals 0, because 0 divided by 2 is still 0. Makes it easy. Okay. Now I can do everything else that I've been doing. I can't do it. If I have something other than x squared in the front, I can't use completing the square. I have to divide by whatever's in front of the x squared. I have to have x squared by itself. If I don't have x squared, I've got to divide by whatever's in front of the x squared to make it x squared in the front. It's an easy step, a necessary step. Okay? Because otherwise you cannot do completing the square. So what's my first step after this? What's my next step on this one? Add 5 to both sides. Do that. Leave a blank. Now I need to fill in that blank. This is the completing the square part. So I take half of this. I take negative 4 divided by 2 to get negative 2. Do I add negative 2 to both sides? No, I square it to get 4. So I add 4 and I add 4. Okay? So when I have this one, when I rewrite it as a perfect square, first thing in here is always x. And then what do I have with the x in the parentheses? I have minus 2. Remember, if this is negative, I have to have a minus here. It's half of this number here. Half of that's negative 2, so I have x minus 2. Equals, what's 5 plus 4? 9. Hopefully you can do 5 plus 4. Hopefully. Sometimes I'm not sure. Okay. Next step. Square root both sides. Square root. Square root. The square root of x minus 2 squared is x minus 2. Equals, what's the square root of 9? 3. But what do I have to have with this for my answer? I have to have plus and minus 3. Whenever I'm solving by using a square root, I have to use plus or minus when I'm solving for, when I take a square root to solve, it has to be plus and minus both. Okay. Now I add 2 to both sides, and I get x equals 2 plus or minus 3. Now, can I combine the 2's and the 3's? I can because it's not in the square root. But I have how many answers? 2. I have 2 plus 3 and 2 minus 3. So 2 plus 3, 5. 2 minus 3, negative 1. Now, this won't happen very often. When you have ones that are perfect squares, it means it was factorable. If it goes down to this, where you get 2 numbers like this, the original problem was factorable, and completing the square was a bad choice for solving the problem. Okay? Realistically, it was. You want your completing the square problems to look like this, where you got a square root as part of the answer, because that means you made the right decision because it wasn't factorable. Can you solve it if it's factorable? Obviously, yes, because we just did use completing the square when it's factorable. But wouldn't factoring be easier than this? I think so. Okay. Any questions?